Hey guys, today I want to talk to you guys a little bit about background information for the novel Things Fall Apart. I don't really have time to go through the entire PowerPoint because I have like a little 15-minute time frame to do these little recordings, and I tend to talk more than that. But I am going to post it on Edmodo so you can review it in more detail. I just think it's really important for us to get some sort of context before we start reading the book so that you can have a better understanding of who these people were living in Nigeria when the European conquerors arrived, okay, when these British missionaries show up on the scene. So let me skip through this a little bit. The first few slides are about Chinua Achebe himself. He is a Nigerian author, and he wrote a lot of books and short stories. They're all very similar thematically in that they depict the breakdown of traditional African culture because of the European colonization and how much was lost of African tradition because of that. And so in Things Fall Apart, his real purpose is to illustrate that confrontation between the Igbo people, that's the native tribe, and then the British Christian missionaries who arrive. And because he tells it from the African point of view, we are going to meet a people who are actually very intelligent, with a society that's very, very structured and has rich traditions. And then the white man arrives, and with this idea that somehow something about these native tribes needs to be fixed. They need to be civilized because maybe they're savages in some way. And Achebe's work is really is trying to illustrate something against that traditional European idea and offer a different perspective of who the Igbo people really were. His style, it's a novel, so you're going to have a lot of that formal European writing style, but what makes it different and quite interesting is the way he weaves African storytelling techniques within it as well. So really be looking for the way he inserts African folktales or little proverbs or idioms. We know what idioms are, right? And he uses them to help him develop not only his writing style, but also the culture and traditions of the Igbo people. The way he writes the book, part one is largely to establish two things. And one is the character of our protagonist, Okonkwo. Who is this man? But then two is to establish the culture and traditions of the Igbo people. It's very important to Achebe that his reader understand who these people were before. And I probably will repeat that several times because I really think it's that important for you to really grasp the magnitude of everything that happens within this super short little book. See, Achebe was what we call a social novelist. So he believed that literature had the power to change the world, that you could write a story that would make people think about things in a different light and maybe make them act differently as well and create social change. So you see Nigeria here on this map of Africa. Here is a close-up of what we have. You can see how the rivers divide the country into three sections, and in each section lived a different tribal people. We're going to be looking at right here. Our story takes place right here in the southeastern region. This is where the Igbo people live. It's over 100 million people in Nigeria today, and the Igbo are the third largest ethnic group. Okay, and they lived down here. Actually, our story takes place probably a little bit farther south of Enugu, closer to some of those ports. So Nigeria, because it was close to those ports that I showed you on the map just now, was a center for European slave trade for a really long time. So both a dangerous and very lucrative business. And I'll share some irony about the slave trade here in just a few minutes. Nigeria was colonized by Great Britain during imperialism, that's 18th and 19th century, but then they were granted their independence in 1914. Still, that's a really long time, though, to live under British influence and British rule, to have the culture and traditions of Western civilization and the Christian ideals, imposed upon you, and that assimilation into a new culture. And that's largely what Things Fall Apart is, a cultural clash. When two societies who really don't have a whole lot in common come face to face, side by side. What happens? The Igbo people in that southeastern region lived in really mainly tropical rainforest type areas. So they've got the rainy season, they've got the dry winds, lots of those geographical weather issues that they had to deal with. They were largely what we call subsistence farmers, so comparable maybe to the Anglo-Saxons that we learned about so long ago, and that their day-to-day lives revolved largely around survival. They grew what they needed to sustain themselves. Okay, crafts and manual labor were a large part of their day-to-day life and even their economy. And then, of course, how to protect themselves in times of war, and that will come up in the novel as well. This is a patriarchal society, so the decision-making, the governing of the people was all done by the men in society. Okay, women had very few rights and they were often treated quite poorly. The depiction of women in this novel is an interesting topic that I might talk about later, because you definitely see a disparity in the way women are treated versus the way men are treated and the way men treat women. But yet you might notice, because I certainly did, an underlying almost respect when it comes to women. So like I said, I'll talk about that maybe a little bit later. As part of their agricultural society, the men and the women each had their own crop that they were responsible for growing. The men would grow the yams, so the yam became a symbol of power and strength because it's the man's crop. And then women would grow other crops to supplement the yam. And they would live in villages that were based on the male line. So all the men in the village were related on their father's side. So if you were a boy, you grew up your whole life living in that same village with all of your other male family members. Women, on the other hand, would move to their husband's village when they got married. So they were coming from, outside clans and outside areas. The family would live in compounds, so it would be like a group of huts or structures that revolved around one center structure. So the man, the father, the husband's hut would be there in the center, and each of the wives would have her own individual hut where she would live with her children. And then, of course, this compound would be connected to the fields and the gardens, the land that was the part of the family's overall estate, if you will. In this society, they didn't have a single leader like a president or a king, like most of the stories that we've looked at so far. Instead, they were governed by a committee of elders, and becoming an elder wasn't something you could inherit. It was something you had to earn, something you could earn, which is actually really important because that means this society had something known as social mobility, meaning it didn't really matter where you were born into the world. You could work your way up and become one of the most important, most respected men in your community. Okay, individual achievement was quite valued in Igbo society. When it came to men, it was probably the most valued thing. What can you achieve in your lifetime? Also in this society, hospitality was very important. So this idea that you welcomed people into your homes, you treated your guests well, you provided food, maybe even gifts for your guests. And also conversely, guests bringing gifts to their host, okay, and that sense of community and welcoming of one another. Now, the irony I spoke of just a minute ago was about slaves, because the Igbo people often owned slaves themselves, slaves that were captured in war or taken as payment for a debt. And so you see the irony, because they were so close to the African ports that even though they sometimes owned slaves, the Igbo people were taken as slaves as well, taken to places, European countries and even the United States. So the Igbo religion revolved around the Chukwu, which was the supreme god, the creator of the world. And the Chukwu would speak to the elders through oracles, a priestess who could hear the oracles speaking and tell the elders what the will of the supreme god really was. Each clan, each village, each household, each person had an individual spirit that guarded and guided them through life. These ancestral spirits were known as the egwugwu, and they would appear at certain ceremonies and rituals. And actually, the egwugwu that would show up at these ceremonies were the elders that were masked and performing as the ancestral spirits. And the idea was when they put on this mask, as you see in the picture here, it was like the ancestral spirit took over their bodies and they were no longer themselves, but instead they were a part of something bigger, okay, something larger and more important. But not only did each community have their ancestral spirits, each individual person had a guardian spirit as well. And that was known as the chi. And your chi, you could have a good chi, you could have a bad chi. Sometimes it depended on your behavior, things that happened to you, and maybe the God's judgment on the kind of person you were. So your chi affected your destiny, but could be influenced by your own individual actions, but could also maybe be even improved by performing certain rituals. Okay, so these are three concepts that are actually kind of important to understand too, because the religious aspect of the Igbo culture tends to play a pretty big role in the book that we're about to read, because when the British come, they are Christian missionaries. So two very different religious beliefs are about to collide. And then finally here, just some basic images from the Igbo lifestyle. Here's that compound that I was talking about. And you can see the different huts built around one another. And then here you see a traditional medicine man or healer. And you can notice that he as well is wearing that mask that would have been part of the ritual and the traditional garb of these people. I know I went really fast through the little PowerPoint. You can go back through a little slower if you need to. But I really want to encourage you through part one of the novel to soak in as much of the culture and tradition as you possibly can. Really try to get inside their heads and understand who they were and how their society was created and how it worked and how they believed and what they felt and what they valued, what was the norm of their society. Because when the white man arrives, all that changes. And it has a profound effect on every single person in the village, in the town. And for you to really get the impact of the effect of colonization on Native people, you need to know the Native people first. And that's what part one of the novel will help you do. It's very, very interesting, I think, because it is so different from what we experience in our world. And I kind of like that kind of thing, learning about different customs and ways of life. And then as the book progresses into part 2 and 3, and we have the arrival of the white man and the Christian missionaries, we can see different characters' reactions to it and maybe understand a little bit about what they're thinking and how they're feeling because of all of the context that is established in part 1. This is a novel I think that you guys will really enjoy. My students in the past really did. So it is short and easy to read, so that helps. Part 1 will be your first reading assignment. And again, you're reading for not only the character of Okonkwo, but also to get an idea of that rich culture and tradition. I'll be coming back on every single day and making little videos, talking a little bit about different aspects of the book that you probably read the day before, pointing out some characterization things or maybe some thematic ideas that I want you guys to notice, okay? For now, you're going to want to hop back on Edmodo and take a look at all of the different things that I posted to go with the novel. The ebook is posted. You don't buy the book. I'm giving you the book online so you can pull it up as a PDF. Okay, you'll also see this PowerPoint and some other things that might help you before you start reading. All right, until tomorrow.